Hey guys, tonight we're delving into a topic that's equal parts horrifying and utterly fascinating. A glimpse into a culture that faced death with a grim, spectacular determination. The horrifying rituals of Viking funerals. Imagine, if you will, the biting Scandinavian wind whipping across a desolate fjord, the dark waters lapping against the shore. You stand amidst a gathering of stern-faced warriors and solemn family members. The air thick with the scent of wood smoke, freshly cut timber, and something else, something primal, something final. Before you lies a magnificent longship, ready not for battle, but for a journey far grander, into the very heart of the afterlife. And honestly, if you were actually there, you'd probably be freezing your bits off or wondering if you accidentally signed up for a human sacrifice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? And what time is it now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself on the edge of a world where death wasn't an end, but a crucial, often violent, transition. For the Vikings, dying well meant going to a good afterlife, typically Valhalla, the Hall of Odin, where fallen warriors feasted and prepared for Ragnarok, the final battle. But getting there required the right send-off, a ritual so potent and complete that it would ensure the deceased's passage to glory. This was not a quiet, somber affair. It was a grand performance, often involving fire, blood, and a terrifying spectacle designed to honor the dead and secure their place among the gods. Think about the importance of a Viking chieftain or a powerful warrior. Their death wasn't just a personal loss, it was a disruption to the community. A moment that required immense ritual to ensure their continued influence. Even from the other side, the funeral wasn't merely a disposal of a corpse, it was an elaborate, weeks-long production. A final, dramatic act that reflected their status in life and prepared them for their eternal role. One common historical truth that sets Viking funerals apart is the practice of ship burial. While not every Viking was buried in a ship, it was the most prestigious and impressive method, reserved for high-status individuals. Imagine a longship, the very vessel that brought them wealth and terror across the seas, now pulled onto land. It's often filled with grave goods, provisions for the journey, and sometimes, incredibly, other beings. This wasn't just symbolic. It was believed to be the actual vehicle that would carry the deceased across the cosmic ocean to the realms of the dead. A fascinating and undeniably chilling detail about these ship burials is the ritualistic use of human sacrifice. Yes, you heard that right. In some of the most elaborate Viking funerals, especially those described in eyewitness accounts like that of the Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan, who witnessed a chieftain's funeral on the Volga River in the 10th century. A living human, usually a slave girl, would volunteer or be chosen to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. This wasn't a casual affair, it was a gruesome, meticulously planned ritual, culminating in her death and interment with the chieftain. Historians still debate the true prevalence of human sacrifice in Viking funerals. While Ibn Fadlan's account is vivid and detailed, archaeological evidence of widespread human sacrifice is rarer, suggesting it might have been reserved for the highest echelons of society, or perhaps exaggerated by foreign observers. However, the very concept being part of their beliefs is horrifying enough. Here's a Viking funeral joke to lighten the mood. Don't worry, no actual Vikings were harmed in the making of this joke. Why did the Viking funeral ship get such bad gas mileage? Because it was always running on an old flame. Get it, old flame? Like a cremation. Okay, I'll stick to the history. The preparations for such a funeral could take weeks, even months. The body of the deceased would sometimes be kept unburied for an extended period, allowing time for the ship to be prepared, for grave goods to be gathered, and for the community to mourn and participate in the elaborate rituals. During this period, the body might be temporarily interred or kept in a special chamber, undergoing various purification rites. This extended preparation period emphasizes the profound significance of the funeral itself, not just as a single event, but as a drawn-out process of transition. Consider the sensory overload of witnessing such a ritual. The sheer size of the ship, the meticulous craftsmanship, the sounds of hammering as planks are secured, the mournful chants or wails, the rhythmic drumming, the sight of elaborate textiles, weapons, and tools being carefully placed around the body. And then, the grim preparations for the accompanying sacrifices. This wasn't something to be passively observed. It was a full-body experience, designed to evoke awe, reverence, and perhaps a healthy dose of fear. Furthermore, the placement of grave goods wasn't random. Each item had a purpose for the afterlife. Weapons for battle in Valhalla, tools for craftsmanship, food and drink for sustenance on the journey or during eternal feasting. Even pets or horses to serve the deceased. These weren't just sentimental items, they were perceived as crucial provisions, ensuring the deceased lacked nothing in the next realm. You, the deceased, would be provisioned for an eternal life that mirrored, in some ways, your earthly existence, but on a grander, more glorious scale, one particularly grim and less commonly known. Aspect of the preparations involved purification rituals for the deceased. The body might be washed multiple times by a specific angel of death figure, as described by Ibn Fadlan, and new clothes would be prepared. This wasn't just about hygiene, it was about symbolically cleansing the individual for their journey to the pure realms of the gods, ensuring they arrived in a state worthy of Valhalla. This fastidious attention to cleanliness before a spectacularly bloody and fiery end provides a striking juxtaposition. So, as you slowly succumb to the deep, dreamless quiet, remember that Viking funerals were a powerful, terrifying, and deeply meaningful expression of a culture that embraced life, battled ferociously, and faced death with an equally ferocious conviction. It wasn't just about saying goodbye, it was about ensuring a glorious transition to a vibrant, albeit often violent, afterlife. And as you finally drift into your own safe, modern slumber, perhaps you'll appreciate the quiet simplicity of your own bed. Far from the dramatic pyres and chilling farewells of the Viking Age, you've already felt the biting wind and glimpsed the solemn spectacle of a Viking funeral, understanding that death was merely a transition for these fierce Norsemen. Now, as the rhythmic hum of your fan continues to lull you deeper, we narrow our focus to the pinnacle of Viking send-offs, the chieftain's last voyage, an elaborate ship burial that involved meticulous preparations, stunning grave goods, and, most chillingly, the stark reality of human sacrifices. Imagine standing on the shore, watching as a magnificent longship, perhaps one that once raided distant lands or carried warriors to glorious battles, is slowly pulled onto land. This isn't just any boat, it's a meticulously chosen vessel, often repurposed for this ultimate journey. Its planks, once battered by ocean waves, now serve as the final grand coffin, a floating tomb designed to carry its esteemed occupant and all their earthly provisions into the unknown. One common historical truth that makes these ship burials so iconic is their sheer scale and visual impact. The Oseberg ship burial in Norway, discovered in 1904, is a prime example. This incredibly well-preserved ship, dating to around 834 AD, contained the remains of 2 women, along with a treasure trove of grave goods, intricate textiles, carved wooden animals, a cart, sleighs, and personal items. It wasn't merely a symbolic burial, it was a physical manifestation of wealth, status, and the belief that the deceased would need these items in the afterlife. You are literally witnessing a miniature version of a Viking's life being packed away for eternity, a fascinating and undeniably grim. Detail about these ship burials is the intentional scuttling or deliberate destruction of the vessel as part of the ritual, after the body and grave goods were placed. The ship would often be pulled into a burial mound, sometimes filled with stones or earth, in many cases. It would then be set alight, becoming a blazing pyre visible for miles, a spectacular farewell that purified and transformed the deceased for their journey. Other times, the ship was simply buried whole. Imagine the roaring flames consuming the vessel, the smoke spiraling upwards, carrying the spirit of the chieftain to Valhalla. This fiery send-off wasn't just dramatic, it was a profound act of transition, transforming the earthly into the ethereal. Historians still debate the exact symbolism of setting the ship ablaze versus burying it intact. Some theories suggest a fire burial was meant to purify the deceased and accelerate their journey to the afterlife, while others point to regional variations in custom or the practicalities of the funeral. Here's a Viking ship joke to lighten the mood. Why did the Viking ship bring a really long rope? Because it was trying to not sink. Get it? No, like tying things. Okay, back to the serious stuff. The preparation of the deceased themselves was equally elaborate. The body of the chieftain would be dressed in fine garments, often rich silks and furs. Reflecting their status, they might be adorned with jewelry and placed on a ceremonial bed or thrown within the ship. This wasn't just about appearance, it was about ensuring they arrived in the afterlife in a manner befitting their earthly prestige. Their appearance in the next world was just as important as their final appearance in this one. Consider the meticulous care taken with the grave goods. These weren't simply thrown into the ship, they were carefully arranged around the deceased. Weapons like swords, axes, and shields, often intricately decorated, were placed within reach, signifying their martial prowess and readiness for battle in the afterlife. Tools for crafting or farming might also be included, implying that the skills and activities of earthly life would continue. And, crucially, provisions for the journey were often present food, drink, and even sacrificed animals like horses or dogs, intended to accompany and serve the deceased in the next realm. You are witnessing a full pantry and armory being loaded for an eternal journey. Furthermore, the inclusion of sacrificial animals like horses, dogs, or even falcons adds another layer of the horrifying reality of these funerals. These animals were not just pets. They were believed to be companions or mounts for the deceased in the afterlife. The act of sacrificing them was a deliberate choice, ensuring the chieftain's continued comfort and status beyond death. The sight of a majestic horse, once full of life, being led to its ritualistic end beside its master's ship, would have been a powerful, somber spectacle, one particularly grim and less commonly known. Detail involves the preparation of the site itself for the ship burial. Often, a large pit or trench would be dug to accommodate the ship, and sometimes a wooden chamber or structure would be built around it before the mound was created. This was a significant engineering feat, requiring considerable communal effort, underscoring the importance the community placed on sending their leader off properly. The ground you're standing on might have been carefully prepared, not just by chance, but by design, to become a permanent, sacred tomb. So, as you slowly succumb to the deep, peaceful quiet, remember that the Viking ship burial was far more than just a burial. It was a grand, complex, and often horrifying ritual. A meticulously planned farewell designed to propel a chieftain into a glorious afterlife. It speaks volumes about their beliefs in continuity, status, and the violent beauty of their world. And as you finally drift into your own safe, modern slumber, perhaps you'll appreciate the calm stillness of your bed. A far cry from the roaring fires and final voyages of the Viking Age, you've stood on the spectral shores, observing the meticulous preparations for a Viking chieftain's final voyage. Now, as the soft, steady hum of your fan continues to soothe you, prepare yourself for perhaps the most disturbing and undeniably horrifying aspect of these grand ceremonies: the chilling role of the slave girl in the funeral rites. A truly brutal and unique Viking custom that continues to shock and perplex historians. Imagine the scene again. But this time, your eyes are drawn to a figure, a young woman, who is not there as a mourner, but as a destined companion. Her fate is inextricably linked to that of the deceased chieftain, a horrifying final act designed to ensure his comfort and status in the afterlife. This wasn't merely a rumor, it's detailed in a primary source, an eyewitness account that brings the brutality of the Viking world into stark, uncomfortable focus. One common historical truth that gives us this insight is the account of Ahmad ibn Fadlan, an Arab traveler and diplomat from the 10th century. He meticulously documented his journey among the Rus, a group of Vikings living in Eastern Europe, and provided a vivid, almost unbearable, description of a chieftain's ship funeral. His narrative, though sometimes viewed with a critical eye due to potential cultural biases, remains one of our most detailed glimpses into these extreme rituals. He recounted seeing a slave girl, dressed in finery, engaged in a series of disturbing preparations, destined to die with her master. This wasn't a quick, merciful end. It was a ritualized progression toward a terrifying conclusion, a fascinating and utterly heartbreaking. Detail from Ibn Fadlan's account is the tent of pleasure ritual that preceded the slave girl's sacrifice. For several days leading up to the cremation, the slave girl would be given intoxicating drinks and compelled to engage in sexual acts with various men of the community, including the deceased's relatives. This was described as a ritualized purification, a final act of communal participation before her transition to the afterlife. Imagine the psychological and physical torment she must have endured, her agency utterly stripped away, forced into this horrifying role as a living sacrifice. Historians still debate the precise interpretation and universality of the tent of pleasure ritual. Some argue it was a form of ritual defilement or purification, while others question the reliability of Ibn Fadlan's full understanding of the cultural context, or if it was a unique practice to that specific Rus group. Regardless, the description is profoundly unsettling. Here's a somber, historical joke for you, if you can even call it that. What did the Viking slave say before the funeral? Well, this is going to be a ship show, a play on words, as she's going on a ship and it's a terrible situation. The climax of this horrifying ritual, according to Ibn Fadlan, involved the slave girl being led onto the ship where the chieftain's body lay. She would visit a series of tents erected on the ship, each time being presented with drinks and seemingly offered a choice. Though her ultimate fate was sealed, the account describes her being lifted over a doorframe, symbolically crossing thresholds, and being led into the very tent containing the deceased. Inside the tent, the ritual reached its brutal conclusion. The Angel of Death, an old woman responsible for orchestrating the sacrifice, would lead a procession. 6 men would then enter the tent with the girl. 2 would hold her feet, 2 her hands, and 2 others would place a rope around her neck, pulling it tight while the Angel of Death simultaneously plunged a knife between her ribs. This was a deliberate, agonizingly slow process, designed to ensure she died with the chieftain. Accompanying him on his journey, the screams, the struggle, the deliberate act of killing it paints a truly grim picture. You can almost hear the muffled sounds. Feel the tension in the air as this horrific act unfolds. Furthermore, the belief system behind this human sacrifice was crucial. It wasn't random cruelty, it was rooted in the conviction that the chieftain, a man of high status, needed companions and servants in the afterlife. The slave girl was deemed an appropriate offering, a tangible asset to accompany him. This belief system, as brutal as it seems to us, justified the ultimate dehumanization of another individual for the perceived benefit of the deceased, one particularly grim and less commonly known aspect of this ritual was the ceremonial burning of the chieftain's living dog, alongside the slave girl in the chieftain's body. Ibn Fadlan described the dog being cut in half and thrown onto the pyre, an additional layer of ritual sacrifice intended to provide companionship and service in the afterlife. This indicates a multi-species escort for the chieftain, reinforcing his supreme status even in death. So, as you slowly succumb to the deep, silent quiet, remember that Viking funerals, particularly those of high-ranking individuals, could involve truly horrifying rituals. The account of the slave girl's sacrifice is a stark, uncomfortable reminder of the brutal realities of a warrior culture that valued status and the afterlife above individual human life, even for those within their own communities. And as you finally drift into your own safe, modern slumber, perhaps you'll appreciate the quiet simplicity of your own farewells, far removed from the grim and violent final journeys of the Viking Age. You've explored the chilling and controversial role of human sacrifice in Viking funerals, a truly disturbing facet of their elaborate death rituals. Now, as the soft, steady hum of your fan continues to soothe you, we turn our attention to another powerful and visually spectacular element, the fiery cremation ceremonies, where bodies and grave goods met their dramatic, often violent, end. Imagine the sheer spectacle. For many Vikings, especially those who died far from home or whose status didn't merit a full ship burial, cremation was the chosen method of dispatch. But this wasn't just a simple burning. It was a carefully orchestrated, ritualized event. A dramatic transformation of the earthly body into smoke and ash, believed to carry the spirit upwards to the divine realms. One common historical truth that sets Viking cremations apart is their intensity and the sheer volume of material often consumed by the flames. Unlike modern cremations that occur in controlled, contained furnaces, Viking cremations were often open-air pyres, built specifically for the purpose. These were not small bonfires, they were massive structures of timber, sometimes incorporating the ship itself, designed to generate immense heat and reduce the body quickly and completely. You can almost feel the heat radiating from such a pyre, the crackle and roar of the flames as they consume everything in their path, a fascinating and somewhat gruesome. Detail is the presence of animal bones, and sometimes even human bone fragments. Amidst the cremation remains in archaeological digs. This isn't just accidental inclusion. It indicates that alongside the deceased, various animals, horses, dogs, even birds of prey were often sacrificed and placed on the pyre. In some cases, personal items and even other individuals, as discussed with human sacrifice, were burned simultaneously. This communal burning ensured that the deceased had companions and provisions for their journey to the afterlife. Even in the fiery crucible, historians still debate the precise ritualistic significance of specific animal sacrifices on pyres across different Viking communities. While the general consensus is about companionship and provision, the exact species and their symbolic meaning might have varied regionally. Here's a fiery Viking joke for you. Why did the Viking go to the art museum? He heard they had a lot of fire arts. Get it, fire like pyre. The construction of the pyre itself was a significant undertaking. Large quantities of dry wood, sometimes even mixed with flammable resins or oils, would be meticulously stacked to create an efficient and powerful blaze. The body of the deceased, adorned with finery and surrounded by grave goods, would be placed at the center. The moment the pyre was lit would have been a profoundly dramatic event, a public spectacle marking the final farewell, the sight of smoke billowing toward the sky. Carrying the essence of the departed would have been deeply symbolic. A visible link between the earthly realm and the divine. Consider the sensory impact of such an event. The intense heat would be almost unbearable from nearby. The air would be thick with the smell of burning wood, flesh, and whatever offerings were consumed. The roar of the flames would drown out almost all other sounds, punctuated only by the occasional crackle of bone or the collapse of burning timber. And the light. The pyre would cast a flickering, orange glow across the landscape, illuminating the stoic faces of the mourners and the somber, smoke-filled sky. This wasn't a gentle fading, it was a violent, transformative process. Furthermore, the collection of the cremated remains was often a ritual in itself. After the fire had died down and the ashes cooled, the bone fragments and any surviving grave goods would be carefully collected. These remains were sometimes placed in urns, or simply buried in a mound, creating a permanent burial site. This careful collection suggests that even after the fiery transformation, the physical remnants of the deceased were still considered sacred and vital for their continued existence in the afterlife. It wasn't just disposal, it was a regathering, one particularly grim and less commonly known. Aspect of these cremations was the potential for incomplete combustion, given the open-air nature and the varied materials. It was not uncommon for some bone fragments or even parts of bodies to remain unburnt. These remnants would then be carefully collected or sometimes even further processed, while the intention was complete transformation. The reality was often a grisly collection of partially consumed remains. A stark reminder of the brutal efficiency of the fire. So, as you slowly succumb to the deep, dreamless quiet, remember that Viking cremation rituals were a dramatic, visceral, and profoundly meaningful expression of their beliefs about death and the afterlife. It was a spectacle of fire and transformation, designed to purify the deceased and send them on a glorious journey to the realms of the gods. And as you finally drift into your own safe, modern slumber, perhaps you'll appreciate the quiet calm of your bed. A far cry from the roaring pyres and fiery farewells of the Viking Age, you've witnessed the dramatic, fiery spectacle of Viking cremation. Understanding it as a transformative act meant to send the deceased to their ultimate destination. Now, as the gentle, steady hum of your fan continues to soothe you, we delve deeper into the very core of this worldview. The Viking beliefs about the afterlife and how these profound convictions shaped their gruesome, yet intensely purposeful, funeral practices. Imagine living in a world where death wasn't simply an end, but a pivotal transition to one of several potential realms, each requiring a specific kind of preparation. For the Vikings, the journey to the afterlife was as real, if not more real, than any voyage across the sea. Their entire approach to death was informed by a complex tapestry of myths, legends, and divine expectations. One common historical truth that dominates our understanding of the Viking afterlife is the concept of Valhalla, Odin's majestic hall. This was the ultimate destination for warriors who died bravely in battle, a place where they would feast, drink, and train endlessly in preparation for Ragnarok, the final cosmic battle between gods and giants. The promise of Valhalla was a powerful motivator for Viking warriors, encouraging them to face death fearlessly. The more glorious your death, the more certain your entry into this warrior's paradise. This belief directly dictated the inclusion of weapons, armor, and even sacrificial warriors or animals in funerals, ensuring the deceased was well equipped for eternal combat and feasting. A fascinating and often overlooked detail is that Valhalla was not the only afterlife destination for those who died of illness or old age. There was Helheim, the realm of Hel, the daughter of Loki. This was not necessarily a place of punishment like Christian hell, but rather a cold, dreary, and misty underworld. Another destination was Folkvanger, the field of the goddess Freya, where half of those slain in battle went. Odin claimed the other half for Valhalla. There were also beliefs in burial mounds becoming a kind of localized afterlife, where the deceased continued to live a semi-physical existence within the mound itself, sometimes interacting with the living. Imagine dying of a stubbed toe and ending up in a frosty, gloomy hall, while your neighbor who died gloriously in a raid gets to feast with Odin. This diversity of afterlives meant that funeral rituals needed to be tailored, ensuring the deceased reached their intended final resting place. Historians still debate the precise social hierarchy of these afterlives and how clearly defined they were in the Viking mind. While Valhalla is prominent in sagas, the everyday Viking likely had a more fluid understanding of where they might end up. Here's a mythological Viking joke for you. Why did Odin refuse to play hide and seek? Because he knew all the realms and thought it was too easy to find everyone. The purpose behind the gruesome aspects of Viking funerals, the human sacrifices. The elaborate pyres. The ship burials becomes clearer when viewed through the lens of these afterlife beliefs. The offerings, the companions, the magnificent send-off were all meant to facilitate the journey and ensure a positive reception in the next realm. If a chieftain was destined for Valhalla, he needed his weapons, his horses, and his loyal retinue even if forced to continue his glorious existence. The fire of the pyre was believed to purify the body and release the spirit, allowing it to ascend. The ship was a literal vessel for the cosmic journey. Consider the role of ancestor veneration in Viking society. The deceased were not simply gone. They remained connected to their living kin and could even influence their fortunes. A proper funeral, therefore, was not just for the dead, but for the living as well. It was a means of maintaining a good relationship with the ancestors, ensuring their favor and preventing them from becoming restless or malevolent spirits. This belief would add immense pressure to perform the rituals correctly, no matter how grim they might seem. Furthermore, the concept of weird, or fate, also played a significant role. While individuals had agency, their ultimate destiny was often seen as interwoven with a larger cosmic pattern. A glorious death, followed by a proper funeral, was seen as fulfilling one's wired, ensuring their place in the grand tapestry of destiny. This fatalistic worldview gave an almost sacred importance to the manner of one's death and subsequent send-off, one particularly grim and less commonly known. Aspect of Viking afterlife belief involved the fear of draugr, or vengeful undead. If a person had died a particularly bad death, or if their burial was not properly conducted, their corpse could become a draugr, a malevolent undead creature that guarded its grave goods and tormented the living. This terrifying possibility added another layer of incentive to perform the funeral rituals meticulously and to ensure sufficient offerings were made. The horrifying rituals were, in part, a preventative measure against a post-mortem nightmare. So, as you slowly succumb to the deep, dreamless quiet, remember that the horrifying rituals of Viking funerals were not arbitrary acts of barbarism. They were deeply meaningful expressions of a complex, multifaceted belief system about the afterlife. Every gruesome detail, every elaborate offering, every fiery cremation was a purposeful step, designed to ensure the deceased's prosperous journey and secure their place among gods or ancestors. And as you finally drift into your own safe, modern slumber, perhaps you'll appreciate the comforting thought that your peaceful rest tonight requires no human sacrifice, no blazing ship, and no fear of returning as a restless spirit. You've delved into the complex tapestry of Viking afterlife beliefs, understanding how their views on Valhalla, Helheim, and the draugr shaped their often horrifying funeral rites. Now, as the soft, rhythmic hum of your fan continues its soothing lull, we turn our attention to the material world of the dead, the vast array of grave goods and grim offerings interred with the deceased. Intended to aid their perilous journey to the realms beyond, or to appease the powerful deities of the Norse pantheon. Imagine standing at the edge of an open burial mound, not just with a body, but with an entire collection of items, carefully chosen, meticulously arranged. These weren't random trinkets. Each object held purpose, reflecting the deceased's status, profession, and the Viking belief in a continuity of life. Even after death, the grave was, in essence, a fully stocked toolkit for eternity. One common historical truth that is widely supported by archaeological findings is the practice of burying individuals with objects they used in life, reflecting their social status and gender. A warrior might be buried with his sword, shield, and helmet, a craftsman with his tools, a woman with her jewelry, weaving implements, or keys symbolizing her household authority. These weren't just sentimental tokens. They were believed to be essential for the deceased to maintain their identity and function in the afterlife. You, the deceased, would not arrive empty-handed, but fully equipped for your eternal role. A fascinating and sometimes chilling detail is the deliberate breakage or killing of grave goods in some Viking burials, especially of weapons. Archaeologists find objects that have been intentionally bent, broken, or ritualistically killed before being interred. This act is often interpreted as a symbolic release of the object's spirit or power, allowing it to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. Rather than remaining in the earthly realm, it also served to deter grave robbers. As a broken sword was less valuable, imagine a powerful axe, its blade deliberately shattered, signifying its passage from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. Historians still debate the precise meaning behind the killing of grave goods, with theories ranging from releasing the object's spirit, deterring robbers, or preventing the reuse of sacred items by the living. Here's a Viking grave goods joke for you. Why did the Viking only bring a pen to Valhalla? Because he heard he'd be writing a lot of sagas. The types of grave goods varied immensely depending on the deceased's wealth, status, and the specific region. For a wealthy chieftain in a ship burial, as we discussed, the grave might include an entire ship, multiple sacrificed animals, horses, dogs, even birds of prey, finely crafted textiles, cooking implements, food and drink, and even the bodies of sacrificed humans. This was a grand, public display of power and wealth, meant to project the deceased's status into the next world. Consider the role of personal ornaments and jewelry. Brooches, necklaces, arm rings, and beads, often made of silver, bronze, or glass, were frequently included. These items not only signified personal wealth and adornment, but were also believed to have protective qualities or to ensure the deceased's beauty and presence in the afterlife. You would arrive in the halls of the gods, not in rags, but in your finest attire, shimmering with earthly treasures. Furthermore, tools and domestic items were common inclusions for many. For farmers, scythes or plowshares; for smiths, hammers and tongs; for seamstresses, needles and shears. These items suggest a belief that earthly skills and daily routines would continue, at least in some form, in the afterlife. It wasn't just warriors who had provisions. Everyone was equipped for their eternal existence, one particularly grim and less commonly known. Aspect of these offerings involved ritual feasting and drinking on the burial site, before the final sealing of the grave or the lighting of the pyre. Communities would often engage in elaborate feasts, consuming food and mead. Some of these food and drink offerings might then be placed with the deceased, intended for their consumption on the journey or in the afterlife. The echoes of merriment and consumption lingering over a place of death provided a stark juxtaposition of life and solemnity. So, as you slowly succumb to the deep, dreamless quiet, remember that Viking grave goods and offerings were far more than just possessions. They were purposeful provisions, carefully selected and often ritualistically prepared, designed to ensure the deceased's comfort, status, and successful journey to the various realms of the afterlife. Each axe, each bead, each sacrificed animal tells a story of belief, status, and the Viking commitment to a life and death lived with purpose and glory, and as you finally drift into your own safe, modern slumber. Perhaps you'll appreciate the comforting thought that your final rest requires no extensive packing list for the great beyond. You've explored the grim purpose behind Viking grave goods and offerings, understanding how each item was meant to provision the deceased for their journey to the afterlife. Now, as the soft, rhythmic hum of your fan continues its soothing lull, we shift from the ancient rituals themselves to the meticulous, painstaking work that brings them back to light. How modern archaeology unearths these ancient burial sites, meticulously piecing together the horrifying truths of Viking death. Imagine a team of dedicated individuals, not with picks and shovels in a frantic rush, but with trowels, brushes, and an almost surgical precision, slowly revealing secrets hidden beneath centuries of Earth? This is the world of modern archaeology, a methodical science that stands in stark contrast to the dramatic, often destructive, treasure hunting of earlier eras. One common historical truth that makes Viking burial sites particularly rich for archaeologists is the exceptional preservation of organic materials in certain conditions. While many burials leave only bone fragments and durable artifacts, specific environments, like the waterlogged clay of the Oseberg ship burial, created anaerobic oxygen-free conditions that allowed for the preservation of wood, textiles, and even human remains with incredible detail. This allows archaeologists to see not just the outline of a ship, but the intricate carvings, the remains of sails, and the very fabrics worn by the deceased. You can almost feel the texture of the ancient wood, the weave of the fabric, brought back to life by careful excavation, a fascinating and often painstaking. Detail is the use of interdisciplinary scientific methods. It's not just about digging. Archaeologists work hand in hand with osteologists who study bones, textile experts, botanists who study plant remains, like pollen or seeds, found in graves, and even forensic scientists, for instance. The analysis of human remains can reveal diet, diseases, and even the cause of death. Textile experts can reconstruct ancient garments from tiny fragments. Botanists can identify plants used for shrouds or ritual purposes. This collaborative approach allows for a far more complete and nuanced understanding of these complex funeral rituals. Historians still debate the ethical considerations of disturbing human remains, even for scientific purposes. Balancing the pursuit of knowledge with respect for the deceased and their cultural context. Here's an archaeological joke for you. Why did the archaeologist break up with the geographer? Because he said she was too earthbound and didn't have enough layers. The process of excavation itself is a meticulous dance between revelation and preservation. Each layer of soil, each found artifact, is carefully mapped, photographed, and documented before being removed. This allows archaeologists to reconstruct the original context of the burial, understanding not just what was buried, but how it was arranged, providing clues about ritual practices, social hierarchies, and symbolic meanings. Imagine the delicate work of brushing away centuries of earth, revealing the faint outline of a ship's hull, or the subtle impression of a long-vanished wooden chamber. Furthermore, advances in DNA analysis are revolutionizing our understanding of Viking burials. By analyzing ancient DNA from human and animal remains, scientists can now determine genetic relationships between individuals, trace migration patterns, and even identify specific diseases that afflicted populations. This level of detail provides an unprecedented glimpse into the lives and deaths of individuals who lived over 1,000 years ago. Moving beyond general assumptions to specific biological facts, you can almost hear the whispered stories of their genes. Consider the role of experimental archaeology in understanding Viking funerals. Researchers sometimes reconstruct and even burn replica Viking ships or pyres to understand the logistics, the heat generated, and the types of remains left behind. This hands-on approach provides invaluable insights into the practicalities of these rituals, helping to confirm or challenge interpretations drawn solely from archaeological findings. It's like watching a real-life historical documentary unfold before your eyes, but with carefully controlled variables, one particularly grim and less commonly known. Aspect that archaeology can sometimes reveal is evidence of violence or coercion associated with human sacrifices. While Ibn Fadlan's account is a written source, archaeological evidence, such as signs of struggle or specific injuries on skeletal remains, can sometimes corroborate ritualistic violence, providing silent, chilling confirmation of these brutal practices. The bones themselves can tell a story of their final moments, long after the flesh has turned to dust. So, as you slowly succumb to the deep, dreamless quiet, remember that modern archaeology is a tireless quest to understand the past, even its most horrifying aspects. Through painstaking excavation and cutting-edge scientific analysis, we can piece together the truths of Viking death rituals, transforming ancient mysteries into tangible knowledge. And as you finally drift into your own safe, modern slumber, perhaps you'll appreciate the comforting thought that the secrets of the past are being carefully unveiled. Not just for sensationalism, but for a deeper, more accurate understanding of humanity's long, complex journey. You've witnessed the meticulous work of modern archaeology, revealing the chilling details of Viking funeral rituals with precision and scientific rigor. Now, as the soft, steady hum of your fan continues to lull you, we broaden our perspective. For while the ship burials and human sacrifices often seize our imagination, it's crucial to understand that the forms of Viking burial were incredibly diverse. Not all of them involving magnificent ships or the grim spectacle of human sacrifice, but each still deeply significant and reflective of Viking beliefs. Imagine a vast landscape dotted not just with grand ship mounds, but with simpler cairns, grave markers, and flat earth burials, each representing a life ended and a journey begun. The stereotype of every Viking being sent off in a blazing longship to Valhalla is a powerful one, but it's far from the complete picture. Economic status, geographic location, and even the circumstances of death played significant roles in how a Viking was interred. One common historical truth that highlights this diversity is the prevalence of simple inhumation burial in the ground, or cremation without elaborate pyres, for the vast majority of Vikings, particularly those of lower social status, farmers, or common folk. A ship burial was an unimaginable luxury. Instead, they would be buried in simple graves, sometimes in small mounds with far fewer grave goods. These burials, while less dramatic, were no less important in their intent to send the deceased properly to the afterlife and to honor their memory. You might find a simple grave containing a few tools, some personal jewelry, or perhaps a single coin to pay for passage to the next world. A fascinating and often overlooked detail is the practice of chamber burials, especially for individuals of middling to high status who didn't receive a ship burial. These involved constructing a wooden or stone chamber within an earthen mound, where the deceased and their grave goods would be placed. While not as grand as a ship, these chambers still offered a protected, deliberate resting place, often filled with a respectable array of items reflecting their earthly life. Imagine a small, wooden room beneath the earth, carefully crafted to house the dead, a miniature home for eternity. Historians still debate the specific social stratification implied by different burial types across various Viking regions. While general trends exist, the exact meaning of a particular burial type might have varied significantly depending on local customs and available resources. Here's a practical Viking burial joke for you. Why did the Viking farmer always choose a flat burial plot? Because he didn't want any bumps in the road to the afterlife. The choice between inhumation and cremation also varied geographically and over time. In some regions, cremation was the dominant practice, perhaps influenced by specific religious beliefs about the purification of fire or practical concerns about land use. In others, inhumation was preferred. This wasn't necessarily a sign of differing afterlife beliefs, but rather a reflection of local customs and traditions within the broader Viking cultural sphere. The core intent to send the dead off well remained consistent. Even if the method differed, consider the burial of children. While child mortality was tragically high, evidence suggests that children were also buried with care and sometimes with specific grave goods. Though often fewer and simpler than adults, these might include small toys, amulets, or miniature versions of adult tools, reflecting the belief that even the youngest members of the community needed a proper send-off and provisions for their journey to the afterlife. It's a poignant reminder that death, in all its forms, was met with solemn ritual, with solemn. Furthermore, the discovery of multiple burials in a single grave mound highlights another aspect of their practices. Sometimes, A mound might contain the remains of several individuals, suggesting familial plots, or perhaps later additions to an existing grave. This indicates a desire for communal resting places, keeping family units together even in death, or perhaps a continuation of veneration for a significant individual. You might find several generations lying side by side, united in their final rest, one particularly poignant and less commonly known. Aspect that archaeology reveals is the inclusion of personal, sometimes seemingly insignificant, items that held deep meaning for the deceased beyond weapons or jewelry. Archaeologists have found small everyday objects: a needle, a comb, a spindle whorl, even gaming pieces. These reveal a more intimate side of Viking life and death, suggesting that even simple comforts or hobbies were believed to accompany the individual into the next world. It's not always about grand displays. Sometimes it's about the small, cherished items that defined a person's daily existence. So, as you slowly succumb to the deep, peaceful quiet, remember that Viking funerals were a rich and varied tapestry of customs, while the roaring ship pyres capture our imagination. The quiet dignity of a simple inhumation or a chamber burial speaks just as powerfully to their profound beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the enduring human need to honor their dead, and as you finally drift into your own safe, modern slumber. Perhaps you'll appreciate the comforting thought that your undisturbed rest requires no grand spectacle, but simply the quiet certainty of peace. You've explored the diverse tapestry of Viking burial customs, understanding that while not everyone received a grand ship burial, the solemnity and purpose of their send-offs remained constant. Now, as the soft, rhythmic hum of your fan continues to lull you, we turn our attention to the mysterious figures who stood at the heart of these grim ceremonies, the seers and sacred individuals who guided these rituals, interpreted omens, and ensured the deceased's perilous journey to the next world. Imagine a figure draped in furs and adorned with protective amulets, their eyes holding an ancient wisdom that transcends the mundane. These weren't just priests in the modern sense. They were individuals intimately connected to the spiritual realm, intermediaries between the living, the dead, and the powerful Norse gods. Their role was crucial, for a misstep in ritual could doom the deceased or even bring ill fortune upon the community. One common historical truth that sheds light on these figures is the role of the vulva or seeress. These were female shamans or priestesses, highly respected and sometimes feared, who practiced satyr, a form of Old Norse magic and shamanism. They could foretell the future, communicate with spirits, and guide complex rituals, including those associated with death and burial. Their presence at a chieftain's funeral would have lent immense spiritual authority to the proceedings. Ensuring the proper performance of every rite, you can almost feel the mystical energy crackling around them as they chant or perform their rituals. A fascinating and often eerie detail is the use of hallucinogenic plants or fungi by these spiritual leaders to induce trances and facilitate communication with the otherworld. While direct archaeological evidence for this is scarce, textual sources and comparative shamanistic practices suggest that Valur might have used substances like fly agaric mushrooms or other psychotropic plants to enter altered states of consciousness. This would allow them to travel to other realms, consult with deities, or receive visions that would guide the funeral process. Imagine a vulva swaying, her eyes unfocused, speaking in tongues or uttering prophecies that dictated the next step of a chieftain's send-off. Historians still debate the precise extent and nature of psychoactive substance use in Viking rituals, with interpretations often relying on indirect evidence and comparative anthropology. Here's a mystic Viking joke for you. Why did the vulva always carry a spare crystal ball? Because she didn't want to lose her sight. The authority of these spiritual guides was immense. They would interpret omens, read signs from the gods, and ensure that the elaborate steps of the funeral, from the preparation of the body and grave goods to the precise timing of the pyre's lighting, were performed flawlessly. Any deviation could be catastrophic. potentially condemning the deceased to an unfavorable afterlife or incurring divine wrath upon the living. Their pronouncements would have been received with utmost seriousness, shaping the actions of an entire community. Consider the concept of ritual purity and defilement, which these spiritual leaders would have meticulously overseen. As we heard in Ibn Fadlan's account, purification rites for the deceased, and sometimes for the living participants, were crucial. The vulva or designated angel of death figure ensured that the body was ritually cleansed and prepared for its sacred journey, removing any impurities that might hinder its passage to the realms beyond. The stakes were incredibly high: eternal salvation or condemnation. Furthermore, the presence of specific cults or priestly roles dedicated to particular gods might also have influenced funeral rites. A devotee of Thor might have a burial emphasizing strength and protection, with specific hammer symbols placed in the grave. A follower of Freya might have rituals focused on love, fertility, and the beauty of death. These specific divine affiliations would have added layers of unique ceremonial elements, all guided by the relevant spiritual authority. You might witness a particular incantation being recited to Freya, appealing for safe passage for the departed soul, one particularly poignant and less commonly known aspect that these spiritual guides might have provided was comfort and psychological closure for the bereaved, in a world with high mortality rates and constant danger. The rituals, guided by the vulva or other figures, offered a structured way to process grief, express respect, and reassure the living that their loved one had reached their destined place. While some aspects were horrifying, others provided a necessary framework for coping with loss in a deeply spiritual society. So, as you slowly succumb to the deep, dreamless quiet, remember that Viking funerals were not just about grand spectacles. They were intricate spiritual journeys, guided by figures who held immense power and wisdom. The seers and sacred individuals were the navigators of death, ensuring safe passage to the realms beyond, interpreting the divine will, and providing a terrifying, yet profound, sense of order in the face of the ultimate unknown. And as you finally drift into your own safe, modern slumber, perhaps you'll appreciate the comforting thought that your journey to dreamland requires no ancient seer, just the quiet embrace of peace. You've delved into the mystical figures who guided Viking funerals, the seers and sacred individuals who interpreted omens and ensured the deceased's passage to the afterlife. Now, as the soft, rhythmic hum of your fan gently whispers you closer to true slumber, we arrive at our final destination, reflecting on these brutal historical rituals as you drift into a profoundly calm, utterly undisturbed, modern slumber. Imagine the sheer distance between your quiet, comfortable bed tonight and the chilling, spectacular funeral pyres of the Viking Age. It's a vast expanse, not just of time, but of worldview, belief, and the very approach to death. The Vikings, fierce and pragmatic, embraced death as an integral part of life, a transition that demanded respect, sacrifice, and a dramatic send-off to ensure glory in the next realm. One common historical truth that we can now fully appreciate is that the horrifying aspects of Viking funerals, the human sacrifices, the fiery cremations, the elaborate grave goods were not acts of arbitrary cruelty, but deeply meaningful expressions of their religious and social beliefs. Every gruesome detail had a purpose to elevate the deceased's status, to provision them for the afterlife, to purify their spirit, and to maintain the cosmic order. Their brutality, from our modern perspective, was their devotion, you looking back might shudder. But to a Viking, it was simply the proper way to send a warrior to Valhalla, a fascinating and deeply profound detail is how these rituals provided a form of psychological closure and continuity for the living. In a world where life was often short and violent, and death was a constant companion, these elaborate funerals offered a structured way to process grief, express communal solidarity, and reinforce their belief system. The very act of participating in such a grand, visceral ceremony, however grim, offered a powerful sense of purpose and reassurance that their loved ones were indeed on their way to a glorious existence. Historians still debate the extent to which individual Vikings truly believed in every detail of the afterlife sagas versus a more general spiritual conviction. However, the consistent adherence to these elaborate rituals suggests a deep communal and personal commitment to these beliefs. Here's one last. Soothing thought to ease you into sleep. What did the Viking say before he went to bed? Time to get some Valhalla sleep. A play on Valhalla, meaning a good sleep, the journey we've taken tonight, through the windswept fjords, the meticulous ship preparations, the chilling role of the slave girl, the roaring pyres, and the diverse forms of burial, is a testament to the sheer depth and complexity of human belief. It reminds us that death, across cultures and centuries, has always been a profound mystery, and humanity has always sought to address it with rituals that reflect its deepest fears and highest aspirations. Consider the stark contrast between their world and yours. They lived with the constant threat of battle, hate, disease, and the uncertainty of the afterlife. You, tonight, are surrounded by comfort and certainty. Your existence far removed from the raw, elemental forces that shaped Viking life and death. Your peace is guaranteed not by a sacrifice or a burning ship, but by the quiet safety of your modern home. The narratives of glory, the grim sacrifices, the wealth of grave goods, they all belong to a past where the veil between life and death was thick with ritual and belief. Today, that veil is drawn back, allowing us to rest with a clarity and calm that would have been unimaginable to a Viking warrior preparing for their final, terrifying yet glorious, journey. And so, as the final thoughts gently dissipate into the quiet expanse of your mind, allow yourself to fully embrace this profound sense of peace. The horrifying rituals have been explored, understood, and safely confined to the history books. There are no long ships preparing, no pyres to be lit, no grim companions. Just the comforting stillness of your room, the steady rhythm of your own breath, and the deep, undisturbed, truly peaceful sleep that now awaits you. You are safe. You are warm. You are at peace.